Hello, this is Dave Winkler, and it is a pleasure to join with you all on this monthly virtual education conference series with the Friends of the National World War II Memorial. I'm going to be talking today about a book that's coming out next month with the Naval Institute Press, Destroyers at War. And this isn't the first time I've been on this program. Previously, I had the opportunity to talk about a book I wrote about the World War II Memorial, Tribute to a Generation, and talk about the remarkable background that led to the construction of the World War II Memorial. Here's an alternative talk title, Resurrecting the Dead, Bringing Deceased Authors Back to Life. And you'll see where I'm going when I talk further about this book. Here's our deceased author, Admiral James L. Holloway, and he passed away back in 2019. And here it is, 2025, and he's coming out with a book. How is that possible? Well, it all started with an unpublished portion of a recorded memoir. Okay, this book is actually a prequel. A little background of our relationship. He was chairman of the Naval Historical Foundation, an organization that is now defunct, but for 25 years I was the staff historian and he was the chairman of the foundation. And he was the 20th Chief of Naval Operations. He had a love for history, and one of the things that we insisted that he accomplish is to record his memoirs, to capture his story on tape. So with that, we successfully were able to acquire a transcript, and he had a passion for aircraft carriers. Okay, and he was an advocate for big deck aircraft carriers. Today, 20 years ago, the big deck aircraft carriers, it's a controversy. Whether or not the Navy should be investing in these things. Well, he was an advocate for big deck aircraft carriers, and he decided to take his memoir about his time in the Navy. When he becomes a naval aviator after World War II, and he gives a personal retrospective of what it was like to be a pilot and go up through the ranks all the way up to the Chief of Naval Operations. And that was published in 2007 by the Naval Institute Press as Aircraft Carriers at War, and it won pretty large acclaim. It was on the Chief of Naval Operations reading list, and it sold a lot of copies for the Naval Institute. Well, the portions of his memoir that deal with prior to him going to naval aviation, when he was growing up, going to the Naval Academy, and his time in service during World War II, that was unpublished, and I started going through that unpublished portion of his memoir and saw a lot of little jewels about life on board ship, what it was like to be in the Pacific, and here's something that caught my eye. They're on Liberty in the Manus Islands in the Western Pacific. He talks about this impromptu officers club and the type of liquor they were serving, and Three Feathers was known as Three Prongs, and Black Label was known as Black Death. Both were to produce a hangover that would last for a minimum 8 hours the following day. Little gems like that I just hated to see remain on a hard drive someplace. So I decided to resurrect it, and along with the rest of his memoir, and see if we could publish it as a prequel, Destroyers at War. Had to walk through a set of challenges to do this, because we're talking about a memoir that was recorded by somebody in his 80s. So we're talking about 60 years of passage of time between when events actually happened and when he recorded this. So, the first thing was, we had to transcribe, and he reviewed the transcripts, as best he could, and corrected historical data where he could. Then I took the transcript, and this is in the past 2 to 3 years, and I just matched it up with the written record, deck logs, war diaries, and to validate that where he said he was where he was at the time, and in some cases the records didn't match. And what I was to discover was that he has a great memory. It's just wasn't chronologically correct. So he would describe, for example, an invasion of a beach at Saipan, and it turns out that what he was really describing was Tinian. Okay, so what I had to do is take a lot of these recollections and put them in chronological order. And once you do that, they really made sense. In a lot of cases, I found that his memory was actually more accurate than the historical record. For example, he talked about the Binion being commissioned, for example, on Christmas Eve. The official history was it was commissioned on New Year's Eve. Well, looked at the deck log, it definitely was Christmas Eve. So in some cases, Holloway was more accurate than the official Navy history. So a lot of this research, I was fortunate that there's a service by Ancestry.com, Fold 3, that you can go into with not much of a charge, and they have scanned thousands of records at the National Archives, war diaries, deck logs. You still need to go in to look at those, search those individually, but a lot of reports, action reports, you can get those all online. Plus I met with members of the family to validate, when he talks about different family members. And then what I wound up doing is writing a 3-part book. The first part about his youth and growing up, I wrote as a biographic approach, in that it was third person. He just did not have enough recollection of his early days as a forefather. Who does? Okay. Fortunately, I had his father's memoir. His father did the same thing back in the 1970s, and the father captured quite a bit of what it was like raising up this young little boy. And then, his family lineage. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but. The second part was autobiographic. It was Holloway talking about his time at the Naval Academy. He had a little stint up at Harvard University. He was supposed to go to a ship, but that ship was sunk early in the war, so he had to bide some time at Harvard training officer candidates. And then he got assigned to the USS Ringgold, a Fletcher-class destroyer. And then he gets assigned to the Binion, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. A third section of the book, I decided to write about the history of those 2 ships he serves on. And then because Holloway had already written a book about his time after World War II, I decided to write a epilogue about Holloway's father, who was coming up through the ranks in the late 40s and the 1950s. And he's Holloway's father, Holloway Jr., is largely credited for the Navy's ROTC program, the Holloway Plan, as it's called, and would be the commander of our forces in the Mediterranean during the Lebanon crisis of 1958. So he's a significant character in his own. A little bit more about Holloway. He's born in Charleston, South Carolina. There's his mother, Jean, and his father, James L. Holloway Jr. The picture you see there is they're both in the Far East. The family, Jean's, was stayed with her father, who was an Army officer at Fort Schlottenberg, which became Clark Air Force Base. While his father was the executive officer on the destroyer USS Truxtun. So you see Dad toting his son there on the quarterdeck. So Holloway's earlier days were in the Philippines, and then he spends a lot of time he's actually going to spend a lot of time with his grandpa, who is going to rise to the rank of Major General. Johnson Haygood is the Haywood, I think is the actual pronunciation, is a descendant of actually a Confederate Civil War officer who was president of the Citadel, back mid 19th century. So, Holloway actually spends more time with Grandpa because his father is doing a lot of sea duty, doing the 1920s and 30s. Because of that sea duty, Holloway is actually sent, the family agrees that he should go to a preparatory school, and he's going to go to St. James Preparatory School in Hagerstown, Maryland, and Holloway would reflect later that he was able to run the staff at the Pentagon based on the teamwork that they were developed, for example, on the football field at St. James Prep. So that was a good life experience for him, and it enables him to get into the Naval Academy. He's going to be at the Naval Academy. He's going to be on the wrestling team. And it's at the Naval Academy he's going to meet Dabney. Dabney Rollins, who's the daughter of a Navy engineering officer, and they are going to get married a few months after he graduates early. He's supposed to be with the class of 43, but because of the war, he's going to graduate from the Naval Academy in June of 1942. And as I mentioned, he's going to go up to Harvard for a few months as what you would call a stash ensign to drill officer candidates, and then he's going to get his first assignment. The USS Ringgold, Fletcher-class destroyer, and he's the assistant gunnery officer. He does all the workups, and he gets out to Pearl Harbor towards summer of 1943, and they're on their way to going to be part of the invasion of Tarawa. But just as Holloway gets to Pearl Harbor, he's ordered off the ship to go back. And why is that? Well, because his captain was so impressed with how capable he was as an assistant gunnery officer, he recommended him to be a gunnery officer. The Bureau of Personnel saw this and says, well, let's put him on a newly commissioned warship, and so he has to do it all over again on the Binion. Binion finally gets out to the Pacific in mid-1944, just in time for Saipan. Binion's going to be out there for the campaign in Saipan, Tinian, Peleliu, and Leyte Gulf. And so we take the narrative where he's at Saipan. Why Saipan? Operation Forester, June 1944. Well, Saipan is within range for B-29s, the super fortresses that were being delivered to the Army's Air Forces. It was determined that if they captured bases, if they captured Saipan, if they captured nearby Tinian, we'd be able to build airfields to put the home islands of Japan within range of the B-29s. So the Japanese realize this, and the Japanese are desperate in their defense of Saipan. They immediately challenge the American invasion force into what would become the greatest carrier battle in history. The Japanese would throw in their remaining 8 aircraft carriers, launch their aircraft towards our fleet, and in the past, the side that gets their airplanes in the air first is going to have an edge, but not this time. Admiral Raymond Spruance, who was the commander of the Fifth Fleet, intentionally held back because he wanted to protect our beachheads at Saipan. So we played defense. And the difference was, our aircraft went up and met the Japanese. We had better pilots. We had better planes at this time. And it was the Battle of the Philippine Sea also became known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Basically, the Japanese air arm that was practically wiped out. So the Japanese still had these they did lose 2 aircraft carriers to submarines in this battle. They basically had empty flight decks. So Holloway is assigned, the Binion's going to be rotating between naval gunfire support, supporting the Marines ashore in Saipan, and doing picket duty station. And doing this, here's one of his diary entries talking about being on a picket station at night where they had been attacked by these Japanese land-based Betty bombers, and they had knocked a few out of the sky. And here's a case where an airplane is approaching, and he is, wants to pull the trigger, and his captain says, "No, don't do it. Hold." And Holloway is just besides himself, and only to discover that there had been an American Army P-61 Black Widow fighter tailing this Japanese aircraft, and as Holloway observes, had they fired, it might have been a blue-on-blue friendly fire incident. On Saipan, this is a bloody battle, and it takes about 3 weeks to secure. This is a very rugged island, lots of pillboxes, caves, and basically the Japanese at the end just mount large suicide attacks against the Marines and Army soldiers that are trying to storm the island. The thing about what made Saipan unique, it was a Japanese mandated island, so consequently there was a civilian population. And one of the horrors of Saipan, towards the end, Holloway's ship is going around the northern side of the island. Marpy Point is these cliffs that overlook the Pacific Ocean, and he witnessed these families just rather than surrendering to the Marines, they were so fearful of what might happen to them, they chose to commit suicide instead and leap off these cliffs into the waters below. The next stop was Peleliu, and why Peleliu? This is an island that is to the south east of the Philippines, which is an agreed upon objective that we want to liberate the Philippines. It was a former American colony. Douglas MacArthur, I shall return. Well, Peleliu, MacArthur was concerned that Peleliu, with its airfield, might be able to impede the American assault, and wanted to secure that airfield for the United States. Admiral Halsey wasn't too sure. Halsey, had been the 5th Fleet under Spruance, turned into the 3rd Fleet under Halsey, and Halsey was thinking, we pretty much did a lot of damage to the Japanese during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. How many airplanes could they possibly have left? So they went ahead and conducted what they thought would be a 4-day invasion of a relatively small island. It turned out to be a good 2 months before they were really able to secure the island. And Holloway witnessed this firsthand. He senses that this is a different type of warfare. The Japanese have changed their tactics. Instead of doing a bonsai assault, throwing themselves at their attackers, the Japanese dug themselves in with the goal of killing as many of the American attackers as possible, knowing full well that in the end Japan's going to lose the island. The key here is to extract casualties that make the cost of pursuing the war so costly that Americans may have second thoughts about advancing on the home islands. And you're going to see this with doing the Philippines. The Japanese are going to introduce kamikazes that are going to take a strong toll on our forces. Yeah, here's Holloway talking about coming alongside the transport. On the Binion, they had a accident in the engineering space where some steam escaped and scalded a sailor. So they went to a hospital ship, a transport that had been converted to a hospital ship, to get some aid for the sailor. And here's what Holloway kind of witnessed as he's up in the gun director looking down, and it was pretty gruesome. So the Holloway's final battle operation on board the Binion takes them to Leyte and Leyte Gulf for the invasion of the Philippines. This is where MacArthur steps off the landing craft and pronounces, "I have returned." The Japanese recognize that this is if the Americans take the Philippines, their sea lanes of communication between where the oil fields are in South Indonesia, the former Dutch East Indies, Borneo, and the home islands is going to be cut. So this is where Japan makes one last effort, and it becomes the largest naval battle in history, at least by tonnage and ships. It's a 3-4 day affair, and what the Japanese do is a very convoluted plan. They have those aircraft carriers that really no longer have airplanes. Admiral Ozawa is going to use them as a decoy force to try and draw Admiral Halsey and the Third Fleet north, and to allow three surface action groups, because there's 2 groups coming through Surigao Strait. One through a big one, a surface action group under Vice Admiral Kurita going through the San Bernardino Strait that includes the 2 Japanese super battleships, the Musashi and the Yamato. And they're going to try and pincer the invasion force that you can see there on the right-hand side of the slide, and just make a mess of the transports and the supporting ships, that escort carriers. Well, it doesn't quite work out to plan. First of all, we have a couple of submarines that take out a few of the Admiral Kurita's ships. Admiral Kurita has to get fished out, and he's put on another warship, and he continues. American airplanes off of Halsey's carriers do interdict. They sink the Musashi, the Japanese super battleship. It takes quite a bit of pounding to get that ship to go under. Kurita pulls back a little bit, and Halsey thinks that Kurita's pulling back permanently, and he sees the decoy force, and he decides to go north. Kurita turns around. He has a clear shot at getting through San Bernardino Strait. Meanwhile, the Southern force is going to be approaching through Surigao Strait, and the Americans are well aware of what's coming. What the Americans do is there's the 7th Fleet and the old battleships from Pearl Harbor that were raised and refurbished. Well, they are providing naval gunfire support, and they are guarding the northern end of Surigao Strait. So you have something here called the crossing of the T, where the Japanese ships are coming up through the strait, and you have these battleships and cruisers just lined up with their guns pointing south. And then you take the destroyers and you line them along the side of the strait there, and you free them up to conduct torpedo attacks. This is Holloway. He's on the Binion there. On the you can see him on the upper left-hand side is one of those destroyers, and he's getting tugged. He can look through his scope and see a Japanese battleship coming up the strait. Here's his passage describing the crossing of the T. As the battleships and cruisers just unleash. And as they said, directly over our heads stretched a procession of tracers, our battleship shells converging on the enemy Japanese column. And he can see the shells sending up cascades of flames as they ripped away gun mounts, fiery sheets of molten steel as they tore into heavy armor plate. So, Holloway, and the Binion is able to launch one of their torpedoes, and it's later confirmed by the Naval War College that one of Binion's torpedoes does strike the battleship Yoshima, I think it is, and it contributes to it being sunk. They're feeling pretty giddy about this. This is a tremendous lopsided win, a revenge of the battleships of Pearl Harbor, and then they start getting messages up north off the Leyte Gulf, and apparently this is Kurita's force had gotten through the San Bernardino Strait and is now descending upon the task force, and it's these jeep carriers that are launching their airplanes, and these destroyers and destroyer escorts, such as the Samuel B. Roberts and the Johnson, that are making suicide runs at the Japanese. And there's a great book by Jim Hornfisher, the late Jim Hornfisher, Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors, that's on the Chief of Naval Operations reading list, and describes the heroism as Admiral Kurita, Vice Admiral Kurita just decides he's actually facing something that's bigger than he's actually facing. He thinks he may be facing the actual Third Fleet, and he decides to turn tail. So anyway, Holloway is going to spend a few more weeks supporting the invasion at Leyte, and then he's going to get his orders being transferred to flight school, and that's where our story comes to an end. And to conclude, I do kind of have an agenda here with this book. This is the only father-son combination who ever achieved the rank of 4 stars, full admiral, while on active duty. So, yeah, do I have an agenda? Yes, I do. I argue we're long overdue for a USS Holloway to honor these two sailors who achieved the highest rank in the U.S. Navy. I should mention I have another deceased author book that just came out last year, Witness to Neptune's Inferno. Speaking of Jim Hornfisher, who wrote Neptune's Inferno about the Battle of Guadalcanal. Lloyd Mustin was a gunnery officer who kept a diary while he was on board the USS Atlanta, and so I wrote a book basically bringing his diary back to life. There's other people who are writing books using the writings of deceased, of the Greatest Generation. Book from the Navy History and Heritage Command, Best Beloved. These are letters that went between Admiral Nimitz and his wife. Here's another memoir, The Youngest Officer. Another recording that was, I think the recording was done in the 1980s, was transcribed and just recently published as a book by Susan Woodward. Here's the thing I'm advocating is there is a lot of great writing out there that just hasn't seen the light of day from the Greatest Generation, and there's opportunities to find this, locate it in archives, and and publish it so that the Greatest Generation, though they have mostly passed on, their voice can still be heard, for generations to come. I also have published other books in the past year. A book about the Navy's first aircraft carrier, the USS Langley. The aforementioned book about the Lloyd Mustin's diary, and it's a companion book, a history of the ship of the USS Atlanta itself. So anyway, I am looking forward to taking your questions.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Where are you right now?
I am Mount Vernon.
Oh, okay.
I live actually on property that was once owned by George.
Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. We have a comment from Janice Blake here. She's a longtime supporter of Friends. And she says, Dr. Winkler, the process you've described in putting a Navy veteran's vivid, detailed memories into chronological order parallel the experiences I had in putting my Uncle Joe's stories into a book-length narrative. In fact, you helped me with that process when I sent queries to the Naval Historical Foundation. Thank you for all you've done to preserve the human stories that are the essence of history. One thing that struck me that was interesting during your presentation was your comment that memory for some participants was more accurate than the actual historical record. That kind of goes counter to what many academic historians say about oral history, etc. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, about how individuals' actual memories many years later were more accurate than what was written down at the time?
Well, not everything is written down at the time, and you have what you have is the deck logs. You have war diaries. But you don't have, for example, in World War II. In some cases, you have some films, but you don't have actual play-by-play descriptions of what happened. So the way I look at things as a historian, as a former surface warfare officer, is history is like I used to be a navigator on a ship, and I always looked for like a 3-point fix. I'd like 3 bearings or 2 bearings in a radar range, and if you get a 3-point fix, you know where you are. So when you're writing history, you ideally you like to get at least 3 sources to confirm a point, and on occasion. You will, sometimes you're shaky about personal recollections, but if you get, confirms from like written sources of a recollection, and they're consistently put you in that box or that that perfect fix, then you can begin trusting those recollections. So in some cases, historians who write history are kind of we can be fallible, we can make mistakes, and I'll give an example. Samuel Eliot Morison. One of my first oral histories I ever did was to right a wrong. Okay, there was Morrison wrote a history of the invasion of Etowah in the mid-Pacific, and he had this one officer basically invade the wrong beach, or he landed his formation on the wrong beach, and that was totally incorrect. And the officer who led that had the records to show he was correct, and we sat down and did an oral history with the fellow, a fellow by the name of Bernard Hollander, and I don't know how Morrison got it wrong. He had some. I think he was using secondhand information or hearsay. But sometimes the actual person on scene has it right.
I want to ask you a counterfactual question. These are always very interesting. What would have happened to the U.S. Navy's campaign in the Pacific had the Japanese destroyed the aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor?
Oh.
Would we have won? I mean, was it possible to win if they had destroyed the aircraft carriers that were not actually in Pearl Harbor? Let's say they were there. What would have happened to the U.S. Navy in the Pacific? We'd have been out of the game, surely.
No.
Okay, well,
no. But first of all, we had at the time we had the Lexington and the Enterprise were in the vicinity of Pearl Harbor. So that's the only thing that the Japanese, if they were in port, they would have nailed those 2 carriers. So that left the Saratoga, I think, Yorktown, Hornet, Ranger, Wasp. We still had most of our carriers either on the East Coast or on the West Coast. So it certainly, we wouldn't have been able to conduct strikes immediately as we started right, in February, January, February, we started these raids on some of the captured. But yeah, certainly it would have it wouldn't have been game set match. No.
Right. So do you think that the major advantage that the US had in the war against the Japanese at sea in the Pacific was our miraculous ability to evolve technology? Would you say that that was the key advantage that we had?
Uh, I think the key advantage really was technology. Certainly, as I discussed in the talk, we improved our aircraft. By the time we got to Saipan, the Hellcat was a heck of a lot better aircraft than the Zero was. But the thing which really made the difference for the United States, as really emphasized by Paul Kennedy in his book Victory at Sea 2 years ago, was the industrial might of the country. The ability of the United States to produce a navy that could just basically overwhelm the Japanese. Evan Maudsley came out with a book last year, Supremacy at Sea, which discusses how in 1944, Spruance's Fifth Fleet was just able to attack Japanese bastions all throughout the Pacific and basically isolate Saipan. So, you had Task Force 58 is it basically four carrier groups of each having 4 carriers of each. He's able to throw up like over 1,000 aircraft at the Japanese. Japanese could not keep up with the American industrial strength. So that's the Paul Kennedy makes an interesting observation. Now, we talk about Midway as a potential turning point of the war. We talk about Guadalcanal. He argues June of 1943 is the turning point of the war because that's when the Essex, USS Essex CD-9 arrives at Pearl Harbor. And every month after that, you have a big deck aircraft carrier coming in and joining the fleet. And Japanese just don't have the industrial base, nor do they have the training program to train the pilots. Once we take out 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at Midway, the greater loss was actually the aviators that went down with those flight decks, and then doing the battles of Guadalcanal. We took out a lot more of the cream of the Japanese naval aviation. 1940, the Japanese have the best trained naval aviators in the world. But once they lose the cream of that crop, it's advantage U.S.
What was wrong with Japanese strategy in the first couple of years in the war? I mean, could they have done things differently, which would have led to a different outcome? What could they have done differently that would have led to a different outcome?
That's I teach strategy and policy with the Naval War College, and I was just discussing this question with a student yesterday. And the thing we thought about was, okay, the Japanese, because of the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in April 1942, they decided that the Japanese were focused on the decisive battle. And Pearl Harbor was supposed to be a knockout blow, a decisive battle that would cause the American morale to say, okay, we don't want to mess with the Japanese. We really want to focus up with the Germans because that is a threat, probably a greater threat at the time. And then the Americans responded. So the Japanese are running wild. A very successful offense in the early winter of 1942 captured vast swaths of of the Western Pacific. But you still got the U.S. Navy there threatening them, and then with that raid on Tokyo, they said we need to settle it once and for all, and we had to and go and try to draw the Americans into this battle at Midway, where we'll take care of their fleet once and for all. And of course, what happens at Midway is they lose 4 of their aircraft carriers, and that basically puts them on the defense. Advantage U.S. But what if they didn't attack Midway? What if they just decided to fortify their islands and maintain basically their carrier force you wouldn't have lost 4 aircraft carriers. You wouldn't have lost all those pilots. That would have been a really tough nugget, because when you think about the pre-war period, the strategies were all about the Japanese were going to try to trike the Americans as they crossed the Pacific. We had this War Plan Orange, and the idea was to go across the Pacific, and the Japanese were going to try and train our forces to the point that when you had that climactic big battle, the Japanese would have the advantage. The Japanese decided to I think it's the equivalent of a naval bonsai charge at Midway. Okay, they threw their forces at us, and they got wiped. Whereas had they had an analogy like Peleliu is basically slowly attrite us and caused so many casualties. There were a lot of Americans that, quite frankly, in late 44, 45, they're seeing the casualties mount up, and they're saying, is it really worth finishing this out? So, that could have been the alternate strategy.
So do you think that Pearl Harbor was a terrible strategic mistake by the Japanese?
Well, they had to face a situation. They were cut off from oil. They had like a year and a half to 2 years oil from the United States. We cut off their heavy metals, the steel, and so if they were going to continue to be an offensive, aggressive power, because they're very focused on China, they were in a bad place. Now, the other what if is, okay, what if they decided just to move south and seize the oil fields of Borneo and Netherlands, East Indies, and not attack the U.S.? Okay, so does the United States declare war on Japan? Obviously the Dutch and the British, they're close. Maybe Britain gets in the war, but Britain's is not in a good place because they're getting bombed by the Luftwaffe. So that's the only thought, is that, okay, maybe they go seize the oil fields and hope that the United States doesn't react. But what happens then is we still made a commitment in 1940, that the Naval Act of 1940, to build the largest navy the world has ever seen. And that's what the Japanese are worried about, that come 1943, there's going to be an Essex arriving in Pearl Harbor every month from there on out. So, the Japanese realize that time is not a friend of theirs. It's not on their side. So, yeah.
When you think about the fact that, I think I read somewhere that the US added 99 aircraft carriers during World War II. That's an extraordinary number of very powerful ships there. Can you tell us just a little bit more about just how good the United States was at mass industrial production? I mean, this seems to be something that hasn't been explored enough. I mean, it is the secret to victory, really, in both theaters. Tell us a little bit more about how a country that only began battleship production in 1937 is transformed within just a few years into this enormous naval power.
Well, we do have some build up in World War One. So there is example in Alexandria. There was like the Virginia Shipbuilding Company, and the problem with World War One is that it ended before production could kick in. But we demonstrated that we could build these facilities. One of the things that did get us going, because unfortunately, I won't say it was a decision made at the time that we had this Washington Naval Arms Conference in 1921-22 that kind of suspended new ship construction for about a decade. We had the Depression. One of the things that Franklin Delano Roosevelt did to take on unemployment was to build ships. So we start out with places such as Federal Shipbuilding in Kearney, New Jersey, expanding construction of destroyers, and then the book I just published on the Atlanta, Atlanta gets built there, and so you have, thanks to the naval authorizations in 1934, in 1938, and 1940, this infrastructure is coming on. And then, of course, once we go to war, it goes like gangbusters. So, and it's kind of mind-boggling when you think about the fact that they didn't have like computers back then. the fact that they had to the capability of putting all these materials and making sure they're in the right place at the right time, to churn out these, right now I'm writing an article about destroyer escorts, and they were able to get those out in a few months. So it's a quick turnaround. You heard about the Victory ships. Liberty ships. I think they churned one of those out in 4 days, just as a demonstration that we could do it. But yeah.
So, was the U.S. Navy opposed to invading the home islands of Japan? To what extent were they opposed to landing American troops in Japan?
I think that that's a good question. That we basically had a situation where the Navy had imposed a blockade, where we're running battleships up and down the coastline, firing on their industrial facilities, parts at will. Our submarines had been so devastating to the Japanese merchant marine by 1945, there was nothing left to torpedo. So I think from the Navy standpoint, they could argue that we could just blockade Japan, and that will do the job, and the problem, will go away, or we don't have to land. So from a Navy standpoint, blockade, and just starvation would, ultimately get the Japanese to surrender. So I don't think the Navy saw a need to invade. And of course, the dropping of the bombs, kind of forced a decision on the Japanese leadership.
Did Admiral Nimitz know about the testing of the atomic bomb? Was he aware of that weapon?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I'm sure he must have.
Right. Because that would explain why perhaps the Navy weren't so enthusiastic about invading Japan, because why would they if we dropped a bomb? of
Yeah, if
that.
we had the bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah, and before MacArthur, of course, he was seeing himself as commanding this great, kind of like Eisenhower with Normandy. This would be like the crowning achievement, but it would have been it would have been a bloodbath. As we saw at Okinawa, was kind of a prelude, prelude, what the Japanese were willing to do as far as to resist.
Was there a great deal of shock at the casualties coming out of Iwo Jima and then Okinawa? To what extent did that really shake people's confidence or unsettle them? That those extraordinary casualty figures coming out of those two battles.
Yeah, well, not only from a naval standpoint, we have the Marines are as you pointed out, the 80th anniversary of Iwo Jima is coming up here in this coming week. The Marines, it's a hard fight for Iwo Jima. And the Army, faces heavy casualties in Okinawa, but the Navy, the amount of casualties that we sustain by these kamikaze attacks off the coast of Okinawa, it's horrific, and that certainly is affecting the new president. Of course, we go into Okinawa, we have a new president, April 12th, Franklin Roosevelt passes away. And for Harry Truman, once he learns that we have this new, weapon system, understanding the population is not is kind of horrified by these casualty rates. He makes a decision based on that logic that we don't want to drive up American casualties any more than we do.
Why do you think that more Americans don't know? Why do you think so many Americans don't know about the Battle of Okinawa, which is the largest land, sea, and air battle ever fought? So the largest land, sea, air battle in human history was Okinawa, and yet most people know nothing about it. Why do we have this bias toward the European theater, toward D-Day, etc.? Why don't people know that the greatest battle ever of combined arms ever in history was the Battle of Okinawa?
Well, I would the invasion of Normandy. Okay, first, in the case of Normandy, we are liberating France. Okay, so obviously the French are still appreciative of that, as the last session highlighted, the atrocities wrought by the Nazis, upon the Jewish population and others in Europe. We're definitely, there's a great evil that, by storming the beaches of Normandy, that's the first step really to eradicating that evil. In the case of Okinawa, we're not liberating Okinawa. We're actually invading Japanese territory, and Okinawa today is part of Japan. So it's Okinawans didn't see us as liberators. So I think that might be part of the story, is that we were not liberators in Okinawa. We were invading Okinawa because we needed, it would be a great staging base for, the invasion of the home islands.
But if you ask those who were imprisoned by the Japanese, or those who were conquered by the Japanese, primarily the Chinese, they would say that the Japanese imperial empire was just as evil, just as genocidal as the Nazis. And yet we still don't have this real recognition of American and Allied sacrifice in the Pacific. The fact that Okinawa is unknown to the vast majority of people seems to be a shame. Can you comment on that?
Well, no, there
This bias toward the European theater?
well, yeah, and this is the Richard Frank is now really doing some really good work. His book Tower of Skulls is talking about he's writing a trilogy, but the war in China. We are. When we focus on the war in the Pacific, we really focus on what the Americans did. And that's what my writings have been focused on. And it's very easy to do that because we're, as historians, we're dealing with easy to get sources, decalogues, memoirs. Going and telling the story of what happened on the mainland in China, first of all, with China being communist and basically closed off to American researchers and scholars for over a half a century, that makes that story very hard to bring out. And then it's not Americans in the fight. It's the Japanese versus the Chinese, and it's an ongoing war. That the interesting thing about China is that the Japanese were still on the offense in China into the last year of the war. What happens is, of course, we're supporting China. We set up air bases in China, B-29 bases, and the Japanese are pushing back to keep those bases out of the range of the homeland. So, there are tens of thousands of Chinese who are being, massacred by the Japanese, and it's and that's one of the considerations for the atom bomb. Okay, if we decide to just sit off the coast of Japan, how long does the war continue on? We can wait for the Japanese to starve on the homelands, but the Japanese army, which is the bulk of their forces, are still waging war against the Chinese. Now, the Russians will be coming into the war on August the 8th, so that would, that's obviously going to be a problem for the Japanese on the mainland. But it's part of our, I guess, American-centric view of World War II. And you can say on the role the Russians had, the Soviet Union in fighting the Germans, taking on the bulk of the German armies, kind of similar to what the Chinese did in the Pacific.
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about it, our liberation of Germany itself, it was about liberating from the Germans from their worst demons, the Nazis, and our defeat of Imperial Japan also was a great gift to the Japanese people because we defeated the junta, if you like, the military junta that was responsible for so many immense war crimes and the desecration of Japanese history. So I think next week, when we look at the 80th anniversary of Iwo Jima, we're looking at the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the end of the American campaign in the Pacific, which has led to a far, far, far better world over the last 80 years. And that's one of the reasons why we should celebrate it. I want to thank you, Mr. Winkler, for joining us, for your amazing books. Thank you for mentioning Jim Hornfischer. He was a very close friend of mine. He was my agent for well over a decade. Much missed. He'd be very proud of you and your work, because I think you're continuing many great historians' tradition. And if you come to DC, rather, if you come to the heart of DC rather than where you are, we'd love to show you around the memorial